We are now turning to what will be, I know, a very fun and stimulating fireside chat with Emily Chasan, who is Sustainable Finance Editor at Bloomberg News, and John Williams, CEO at Domtar, and I introduced them both a bit upstairs. So I'm going to turn it over to them, and thank you again, both of you, for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Great. Well, thanks for having us today and for coming and listening and having lunch while we talk. So please don't stop eating or anything. My name is Emily Chasan, as she said, and I'm the Sustainable Finance Editor at Bloomberg News. I run our Good Business newsletter, where it's like everything this week happens in sustainable finance. And we've actually been talking a lot about paper and pulp recently, about forests, trees. So I think we're going to have a great discussion with John Williams here from Domtar. But I think a lot of Americans are probably not very familiar with your company, though they maybe see it all the time and don't even know it. So can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
I'll give you the whistle-stop tour. We're a pulp and paper company, as you say. We also make adult diapers and we make baby diapers. We've been in business for 171 years, so we were founded by the Brits, actually, in 1848. And they were brilliant enough to realize there weren't that many trees in the UK, so they went to Canada. So we were very much a Canadian business for a number of years, but we've been listed now on the New York Stock Exchange. We did a transaction 2007 with Weyerhaeuser, and so we've been on the NYSE since then. So we're about $5.7 billion in sales and about 10,000 people and a whole raft, obviously, of paper mills and converting sites, mostly in the US and Canada and also in Europe.
So I thought it was really interesting when we were talking in our prep before this that you guys call yourself a sustainable paper company. Mm-hmm. How did you arrive at that? Paper seems like it's made from trees, and how did you become the sustainable paper company?
Well, it's a great question. So thank you so much for asking that as the first question. I think it's fairly simple, really. Nobody needs healthy forests and sustainable forests more than the paper industry, because patently, if we don't have healthy forests and we don't have sustainable forests, we have no business. Mm-hmm. So from our standpoint, very early on, actually, we adopted sustainability standards in terms of the wood we purchase, so forest stewardship certification, so to make certain that we were buying woods from good wood from good actors, if you like, in terms of the forest.
What's a good actor?
Well, somebody who makes sure they takes care of the land, make sure they're certified, FSC certified, make certain that they're having minimum impact, make sure that they're actually replanting, all those issues. They're not harvesting trees that are too young, all those kind of things, and making absolutely certain that we're purchasing from those folks, and that's what we do. So within our industry, we're the largest operator, really, with that certification. And I'll talk later when you ask me the question about the impact that has in terms of our customer base.
So yeah, let's talk about your sustainability journey,
Mm-hmm.
because it's not just paper and forest, but you've sort of tried to infuse sustainability through your company in lots of different ways. How?
Yes, that's a great question. So I suppose you have to think, it's interesting, listening this morning, there's often, I think, a disconnect between the senior management of a business and the sustainability, if you like, organization. But in fact, one says that, here are the people who deal with sustainability. I think that's deeply unhealthy, to be honest. In my view, the whole thing should be integrated. So the whole enterprise should be concerned about sustainability, and that has to be driven from the senior management. So from our staff, and in fact, further than that, it has to be driven by the board. So if you look at our board, we actually have an environmental health sustainability committee that's board driven. So that holds us accountable both on the environmental side of things and other sustainability issues, and as importantly on health and safety. So we're very concerned that our workforce goes home safe in the evening. So I think when you drive it from that perspective, you'll drive it through the business.
What's an example of the way the board
so for example,
decision?
yeah, that's a great question. So if you look at I'll take health and safety as a good example. So every board meeting, we are reporting to our board any issues around safety. We're reporting any issues around environmental issues. We're reporting on water usage. We're reporting on power usage. We're reporting on landfill. So the whole time, that very senior committee at the board level is making certain they are overseeing our work. And that obviously makes sure we've got good governance around it, and it makes certain that it's really driven throughout the business. I mean, another good example I would say is really on the recruitment side of things. So when we think about retaining people, I don't think it's actually, people will say, oh, well, you know, it's the young who care about this. I don't believe that's true. I think grandparents care just as much. So we make certain that actually from a employer brand standpoint, that we're telling this story to people who are joining Domtar. And anecdotally, I talk to people who just joined our business, and that's one of the key reasons they join us.
Interesting. Have you seen other people in your industry adopt that kind of story?
Well, that's an interesting question, isn't it? So I think if you look at what we're trying to do, we as Domtar are trying to differentiate ourselves within our industry. And as you differentiate yourself, of course, everybody thinks, well, that seems to work, so we'll catch up. Mm-hmm. So I would say we are ahead of the game a little bit, but I mean, we always have to get better and better because competition being what it is, people will realize the value of this. I think at the minute, there's a little bit of daylight between us and our competition, but they'll catch up pretty fast and we'll have to keep moving.
And interesting that you talk about the value of sustainability, mm-hmm. and obviously you've like gone from the board and they see the value also. Mm-hmm. Where is the value most present in the business, you think, from pursuing sustainability?
So if you take a number of issues, so we process this fantastic biomaterial that happens to be called wood. It's a crop. And from that wood, what we need mostly is the cellulose, with which we'll make paper and pulp. The other key component of wood is, of course, lignin. We take that lignin and we currently burn it correctly in terms of emissions, and we use that for power. So 76% of all the power we use, we generate ourselves. Now, if you imagine the cost that we would incur if we were just buying that power, we'd be completely uncompetitive. So that's one huge embedded piece in this business because we have this biomaterial. So that's
kind of like nothing is wasted idea.
Well, so and another one, for example, our landfill, we've reduced our what goes to landfill by about 40% over the last few years. One of the wastes that used to go to landfill in North Carolina actually now goes on farmers' fields and acts to really bind the soil together. So the farmer gets a break because it's far cheaper than expensive fertilizer, and we actually have a secondary usage for our product. So that's one small example.
Very good. One of the things I wanted to ask you about paper and pulp is you mentioned a little bit before about how you're very dependent on forests. Mm-hmm. You care more about forests than probably anybody. Right. And we're talking about forests a lot more lately with the UN report out there that we're going to miss sort of the 1.5 degree target and how important it is to sort of be sucking carbon
Correct.
Out of the atmosphere. And so how do you guys think about sort of climate resilience of your forests? And I mean, maybe you don't own that many forests, but how do you think about that in your business?
We used to. We buy wood from third parties, but we used to own a large amount of forest. So let me talk that through in a number of ways. I'll give you one very good example. Right now, there are really two kinds of wood. There's hardwood, softwood. Softwood typically grows in higher areas. Hardwood would grow in lower areas. Right now, the southern US is largely flooded because of all the rain. So that has meant it's been very difficult to harvest wood. That will probably cost our business several $1 million over the next few months, as actually we have to wait for the ground to dry out and we won't incur the costs. So there's a classic case, I would argue, where climate is really impacting our business. We're going to have to learn how to deal with that. The other issue is our mills in the southern United States are not built to sustain severe cold. Obviously, our mills in Canada, no disrespect to Canadians, are built to withstand that cold. But our mills in the south are not. So consequently, you know, we've had issues in some of these harsher winters we've been having. So those are two cases where it's really impacting the business. Other issue, obviously, we do a lot of sea transport, so we have to make certain that, you know, that's as it should be. I think on the forest itself, I think there's an economic issue. Every job, most of our mills are in very remote places. They're in small towns. We will typically be 60% of the tax take of the town. So if we're not globally competitive, if we actually close a mill, we end up closing a town. So we don't want to be that operator. We've had to close mills before. We don't want to be that person. So the other thing I think that we bring is we bring an economic reason for forests to be. And I think that's a very compelling story. So for every job we have in our mill, we create 4 other local jobs. And that's creating rural economy jobs. And to my mind, that will also lead to forests being sustainable over time, because they're way people can make a living.
Right. If you're dependent on the forest, then you have to...
Exactly, because I think they're not just places we're going to take the dog for a walk or we're going to go hunting. They actually need an economic reason to exist.
And then the other thing I think people don't know about paper and pulp that we were talking about is water is it's a very water intensive business.
It is.
So how do you think about that also in terms of climate resilience and making sure that you can use water sustainably?
Certainly. So about 95% of the water we bring in goes back out again. Typically it goes out purer when it goes out than when it comes in.
How do you manage that?
Well, we manage that through water treatment plants. So every one of our mills will have major water treatment abilities. The rest probably goes out in the product to some extent, of course, because we're making a product out of which you take water. So so there are two things. One, to make certain we try and use less, because it may look free, but actually the piping required, the heating and the cooling required. So we try and reduce our water usage, and we make certain that the water then that goes out of the mill is fit for use, within the river or wherever it happens to come out of.
And have you seen like a return on investment from the sustainable water initiatives you've
Well, the answer is yes. I can't give you the number, but there's no question that we have seen as we reduce water usage, two things start to happen. We get better yield in our product, and we get lower capital intensity. We need less capital in terms of piping and treatment, et cetera.
And we talked a little bit about climate resilience, right? And that's one of the big risks out there. But do you have a way that you think about reporting sustainability information and maybe incorporating some of that into your risk management?
Well, so the answer to that question is yes. So for example, obviously within the audit committee and the board, we're always looking at enterprise risk management. Within those risks, there are 2 or 3 major risks of the top 10 risks that we perceive to be around these kind of issues: the sustainability issue, I would say the right to operate issue, the reputational issue, where I think a lot of this stuff actually started. So more and more we're thinking about that. I personally struggle, which is why I was the chairman of this group for 3 years here, because trying to really find the return on investment and get those numbers to be very specific to particular projects, I don't think we as Domtar, I can't speak for industry, have done particularly well. So we produce a sustainability report that gives you lots of data. What we don't really do, or haven't done so far, is relate that data to specific returns. But I could, if I think about power usage, if I think about waste reduction generally, obviously the returns are very high, but that's not the whole story, of course, on sustainability. It's only a part of the story.
Right. Well, that's a very honest description of where you guys are. So there's always more to do.
And worryingly, we're seen as a leader, so it's a journey.
And so I wanted to ask too whether about recycling, right? Because paper is one of those things that in New York we really think about recycling paper. And New York's actually a very good paper recycling place. But since China has been taking less paper, do you think about the life cycle of paper? And how that is in your business and what's going to do with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you take sort of the virgin fiber, so when we've cut the tree and we've turned it into a piece of paper, obviously that then has its usage, whether it's in your photocopy machine or your book or your direct mail piece, whatever it may be. That will obviously be recycled. It probably has 4 or 5 turns before the fiber has been devalued to the point where it's no longer usable. So yes, our product will have probably 4 or 5 more uses once it's turned back into fiber than one single use. No question about that.
And do you talk to your customers about that, or is that a conversation that you're starting to see?
Well, it's interesting. So our customers, yes, are interested in recycled content. Obviously, recycling creates a lot of power usage, so there's some argument around the element of what you actually have to do to something to recycle it in terms of whether that has any value. Not quite so much in the paper space, but particularly in the plastic space. And our customers are really wanting to make sure, one, that we use sustainable forestry practices. That's very important to them. So obviously our major accounts are people like Staples and Office Depot. They will visit us, they will visit the forest, they will look at our forest practices, and they will want to be certain that those forest practices are sustainable. So that's really where they're looking at us.
Interesting. And I also wanted to ask about employee engagement, because you talked about this being sort of a recruitment tool by emphasizing the sustainability strategy, but also in terms of keeping your employee turnover low. How does that work?
Well, so our employee turnover is only 4%. Average employee turnover is 11%. So Either we're just really nice people and nice to work for and pay everybody far too much money so they stay. I don't think that's the case. I hope it's not anyway. I think more importantly, we have, I think on the employee front, there's absolutely no question. Companies now have to create an environment where people feel valued. I am old enough to remember environments where nobody cared if you felt valued or not, right? You just did the work. You were just an output creator. That's no longer the case. I think people have far more of an opinion about how they wish to be treated. We are very careful that we are respectful to everybody who works for us. So I am obsessed by that. I try and drive that culture because I've worked in very different ones, which I didn't enjoy, and I don't want to drive one of those. Sustainability, I think, is a key part of that. Because if you think about the sustainable enterprise really has to have longevity. And the way I look at competitive advantage is really quite simple. Anyone can go and buy the equipment I have, and anyone knows who the customers are. The only competitive advantage is really the people in the business. And I believe sustainability is a key motivator. So it starts, as it started in our business, as an industry that quite frankly had a terrible reputation, right? You think of the paper industry, you think of, how your beach house is ruined by the smell from the paper mill or whatever it may be. So we said, no, we're going to set out we're going to do the right thing around these issues. And as you set out to do the right thing, you find employees are motivated and interested and with you because they know that they want to do the right thing as well. The other thing I think that has driven people in this direction is, of course, the visibility of everything we do. So once upon a time, sustainability, you could produce the beautiful marketing brochure, and then you could act appallingly in your business assets, right? You can't do that anymore, nor should you be able to do that anymore, because you're going to get caught out. So anybody who thinks this is a marketing story is out of their mind. You have to behave according to these principles and values, and then you tell the world what you're doing about it.
Do you hear differently from investors about your sustainability?
Well, that's an interesting question. So I've done this job now for 10 and a half years. So I was working at, I think, 42 quarterly earnings calls. I have to say, in that environment, this issue has never come up. We talk about health and safety, but we've never talked about these issues in a quarterly earnings call. Now, it's only an hour, it's very scripted. I mean, we all know how these things work. However, what we are seeing from an investor standpoint, so I was at BlackRock 2 weeks ago, and the entire conversation was what they refer to as ESG. So around how companies are behaving sustainably, how they're looking for return on investment on these issues, and how this is going to matter more and more to investors. So I would say it's emerging, but it's by no means incorporated in day-to-day investor relations.
I guess it's interesting because they're long-term issues, and the earnings call by its nature is sort of a short-term audience.
It is. It is.
Do you see that play in the long-term, short-term in the business? And how
Well, that's an interesting. So, I think a lot of chief executives would tell you, I get frustrated by the public market because it won't let me do stuff. It's short-term focus. In all honesty, I've never had that experience. I think if you have a solid long-term strategy that's well articulated, and you work that strategy and you report on progress on that strategy, you can operate as you see fit. I do think there is one issue, which is a bit of a hobby horse of mine, and my apologies you walked into it, is right now there are a lot of organizations making judgments about corporations on all kinds of issues. Sustainability is obviously one of them, but there are any number of issues. And they'll send you a report saying, good news, you've come 10th in our survey. And you have no idea what the survey was or who they are. And then they'll say, so that you call up and you say, well, that's great, we're really happy to be 10th. How do we get to be 10th? Well, we can't tell you that. But if you buy consulting from us, we'll explain how you become 5th. I find that pretty frustrating, actually, even if you do come 10th. And I remain a little nervous that if we're not careful, we're going to put so much onus on public corporations, we're actually going to frighten them out of the public market. And I think the thing to remind ourselves about is that the private equity investor has several $1 trillion to invest. And the number of public companies is declining quite quickly, actually. So I think there's a balance to be found here between what matters and what doesn't matter. Obviously, I believe this matters, otherwise I wouldn't be here this morning. But the public space is getting very noisy for companies, and that can sometimes mean they're incurring costs that they're going to resent, and they're going to start to think about, is there a better space for me than the public market? And that worries me, actually.
Do you think investors need to be a little bit more consistent on their message to companies on these issues?
Well, I think, when you think about an investor, what constitutes an investor? Is it the person who actually owns the stock? Is it the person whose pension plan owns the stock? Is it the person who wants their pension at 65? Who's the investor? Because the intermediary now sees themselves as the investor. That's perfectly acceptable. I don't quarrel with that. So they're also looking to attract funds. One of the ways they're going to look to attract funds is to differentiate themselves. Whether it be, whether I'm a tracker, whether I'm an active fund, whatever it may be. So people are fighting to differentiate themselves from a money management standpoint. Consequently, I think they will have different ways of investing and different things they care about. And that's fine. So I have everybody from, obviously, the large index funds, who are everybody's major investor these days, to a small fund in Chicago, which is actually a women-run fund, who are a very active investor. They do look at things slightly differently.
And so when you look out in the sustainability landscape, we've talked on a lot of different issues here,
Right,
but
right.
what do you see as sort of the main issues on the horizon of sustainability in the paper and pulp industry?
Yeah, if I may, I'll talk even more broadly than pulp and paper, I think,
Okay,
if I may.
sure.
I believe we have to make certain that we kind of get to the chief executives and the chief financial officers and explain the relevance and explain the fact that this is compelling, and actually explain that over time we will build better businesses because we care about this and we're acting on this. And I see that disconnect occasionally. Where's the sustainability person in this business? Well, go down the corridor, take the third right, go down the stairs, you'll see a sign that says sustainability. I think that's a dangerous place to be. So we have to make it relevant to senior management. And the way we make it relevant to senior management, which I think, Stern is doing a great job of, is to say there is real money. So you start off, I think, here saying, I need to have a right to operate. It's obvious that behaving in a sustainable fashion will allow me to continue to have a right to operate. That seems to me vital, right? I must be able to do business. I can no longer do business by being a bad actor. We all right for time? We're okay. We've got 5 minutes. Are you getting signs?
I was trying to see what the time was, yeah.
That's right. So you can't do that anymore. And I also think there is massive return here. I think for the pulp and paper industry, what's the most interesting business opportunity is we have this incredible material. And that material now could be used for all kinds of applications. So if you like a biomaterials business, and we have these incredible materials we can generate from cellulose and lignin, if we could build those businesses out over the next 10 to 15 years, we'd have a huge revenue stream that currently as an industry we don't have. And obviously we're engaged in that as much as we can.
When you look on the policy front in the next 5 to 10 years, people talk more and more about carbon prices and that sort of thing. And how do you think about that and something that could be a change in your business going forward?
I'm a bit obsessed about things like infrastructure, actually. So, I don't mean to be I'm a dual citizen, so I guess I can say this as an American. Our infrastructure is falling apart. And because our infrastructure is falling apart, if we're not careful, our businesses will be less and less competitive. So I do see a policy issue around how can we build a competitive infrastructure and how can we build that sustainably. So all kinds of issues around the fuels we use, the way we construct roads and buildings, how do we do all that? We have to minimize energy usage, but we also have to make sure at the same time that we remain competitive globally, because we can't become an island, to be frank, as my island is discovering to its horror as we speak. So I think that's where I see a huge policy issue, going forward. And a policy issue that doesn't see business as the enemy, but sees business as part of the solution. Because if you see us as the enemy, and in a way, if you ask the old bank robbers of the 20s, why did they rob banks? They say, well, that's because where the money is. Now, I think some policymakers see corporations as where the money is. And I think that's partly dangerous too. So let us be part of the solution from a policy standpoint, not the enemy.
Okay. Well, thank you for a great discussion. Is there time for one question? Or?
Yes, there's a chance for
Right there.
Gail, how did I know?
I wouldn't want to let you down.
No, thank you. Thank you for being so reliable. Sure.
So you might have touched on this with the biomaterials, but over the last 6 months, year, a lot of really large consumer companies have been announcing that they're going to commit to 100% renewable, recyclable, compostable materials, and obviously not a main business for you, but I'm just wondering if you see opportunities there.
We do. So historically, as you may know, a lot of what we have seen as waste, whether that would be tall oil or whatever it might be, we've kind of had one person it's gone to, and we've been very happy we've got rid of it. Actually, when you look at it much more carefully, these are huge business opportunities for our industry and for us, actually. Lignin obviously being a classic case in point, nanocrystalline cellulose, a whole bunch of materials. So right now, we have a tiny little business, sort of $45 million. I mean, that should be able to grow exponentially over the next 10 to 15 years if we're smart, and I think the whole industry has that opportunity.
Anything on the paper side for packaging?
Well, I mean, on the paper side, there is now more of, I think, a sense of plastic has its challenges. Are there paper alternatives? So, most of the flow wrap in the world used to be paper, now it's plastic. With the right technology, it can easily go back to paper again. So there are more opportunities around sort of paper packaging than there used to be.
One more question.
I have one.
Oh, please. Hi.
Hi, Celine DeCarlo from Mara Hoffman.
How do you do?
Well, thank you. So I think what we struggle with, we're a women's contemporary brand here in New York City, and this idea of being in a very capitalist society, which, in this existing audience, we also have to be. But there's a lot of Band-Aid solutions that come about. I think seeing any kind of natural landscape as existing for an economic reason is a little terrifying to speak about. But this idea of carbon credits right now, what's your take on this?
Well, I mean, can I answer the first bit too? Because obviously I care rather deeply about that. And my view is I can't see there is necessarily a binary relationship between forestry and, how would I call it, recreation and for, the carbon sink aspect. Because undoubtedly, if you just leave virgin forest to do its thing, it has its own challenges. Forests do need managing. If you take biodiversity, for example, I'll give you one good example. A managed hectare probably has about 98% of the biodiversity of virgin forest. A field of corn has 2%. And we're all talking about, ethanol's got to be great. So I don't quite know how we work that out, but that's a whole other story. To the carbon credit point, my worry always is if you have any kind of trading relationship around these things, the bad actor can remain the bad actor but do a deal to look like a good actor. And I'm not sure I like that very much. So I would rather reward the good actor. That make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Great.
One question from
Great
me,
question.
and then we.
Please.
Lee Ballard from Bloomberg.
Oh, hi.
Nice socks,
Thank you. Do you want to know the story behind them?
I'd love to.
Okay. Well, so we have 8 dogs at home, talking about biodiversity, and we have a young lady who looks after those dogs, and she had a baby who's like our granddaughter, and she went out at Christmas, and the baby chose these socks for me. So thank you for asking, by the way.
Just with respect to the investor relations call, the quarterly call.
Yes.
If the if the call is scripted, doesn't that provide a great leadership opportunity for you to direct the script to some of the long-term things that you guys are doing?
The answer is yes, it does. And you're probably right. If there's embedded in the question, you guys probably haven't done enough about that. I think that's a very fair point. Now, if you think about that scripted part of the call, the first 20 minutes, of course, we're trying to get as much data into that as we possibly can that talks to the game we want to take before the questions roll in. But I think you make a good point. I will take that under advisement and have a look.
Do me a favor. One data point around sustainability on
All right. You've challenged me. I will rise to the challenge. But I will never come again.
Well,
Yeah, exactly. And you were so nice. I don't know what went wrong.
like, we're both from Bloomberg.
Oh, is that what it is? Yeah, I knew there was something. It's kind of the yin and the yang of how it operates. Right?
Exactly.
There was a question there, I think.
I think we have to.
Oh, do we done?
Yes, we.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well,
about
thank
that.
you.
But thank you very much, John and Emily, for a terrific fireside chat.
Thank you, Emily. Oh, it was lovely. Thank you so much.